Okay, so for this podcast, we have a legend in the Tesla community. If you've watched any of those flyover drone videos that are out there of Giga, Texas, and all these things that were happening and are still happening, all these little nuggets that nobody else knows is going on, Joe Tegmeyer, one of the coolest members of the Tesla community, is joining Larry on the Maverick Mind. Larry, tell us why Joe is such an incredible person. They know him for his drones, right? But this guy has a lot more than it may seem. I mean, he's one of the coolest individuals I've ever come across.
So Joe is a true pilot. I mean, yes, he's flying the drones for us right now in the tradition, the long tradition of drones, watching first Shanghai built and then Berlin being built, and then now we have Texas being built. But Joe brings a lot more to the party than just being a great pilot. He was, as you'll find out from the interview, an Airforce pilot. Incredible experience. Joe is an engineer, and he brings with this engineering knowledge the ability to delve into what's happening on the ground, why it's happening, what the components are, and how they fit, and what this means for the factory and where it's going. And he's done that for us at Giga, Texas. He's done that for us at the lithium plant, and now he's doing it for us at SpaceX. You know, I meet Joe every time I go and see a launch. Joe's at the launch, and and he gives us the inside scoop. He knows a lot of people. He of course observes a lot. Now you can't fly the drone around SpaceX there, but on the ground he learns a great deal, and so you know he is the ultimate teacher for us of what's happening. And we owe a lot to him in terms of his insights into the manufacturing process and what is happening on the ground in Texas. And so he's our Maverick Mind in Texas.
I think, and you'll see this come across in the interview, his commitment to the craft is unbelievable. Because this, I don't think people realize, this guy drives like an hour and a half each way every day to go get footage for the Tesla community on everything that's going on at Giga, Texas. And then he goes home, he edits it, he does all this stuff. It's unbelievable amount of work, you know?
Yeah, he doesn't live in Austin, which is amazing, you know? He lives down in the road in San Antonio, does that driving backwards and forwards. And he's had me in his introduction, you know? Yeah. When he does the introduction, he's had me there. I visited him there.
You made a cameo.
I made a cameo, yeah. He is such a nice guy, though. At the bottom, he's just the most approachable, easiest going guy. I don't think he has an enemy in his life.
Yeah, a really kind person. The second you meet him, they get that warmth, but then there's also that edge to him that he is so dedicated to craft, and I think that will come across in spades here in the interview. So without further ado, here are Joe and Larry.
I think you need to come and see it. And so I came, and it was a company that this organization, Capital Factory, was leading the investment round in. And he is the director of the company. And so I met them and just fell in love with this place. And so it's been my office here in Austin. And every time I come to Austin, I have an office.
It's pretty cool.
But today we got to interview the founder of this place, who's an extraordinary guy. I hope you'll watch the video and get to meet him. So, Joe, everybody knows you. And everybody knows you as this guy who does these incredible, or has been creating this incredible history of the Tesla Gigafactory in Austin. And we've learned so much about it. I guess you've learned and taught us, and it's been an incredible journey. But I'm more interested in your journey. You know, I know that you're a pilot, and I know you're a pilot of KC-135s. And so I was just so fascinated by it. And, you know, you're such a fount of knowledge, engineering, flying knowledge, of course. And, you know, we've met several times in Boca Chica to see the launches. And you clearly have, you know, deep insight there. So I was just so fascinated. And so I wanted to get a little bit of background. I mean, tell us about yourself.
How did I get here?
How did you get here?
Well, it's kind of been, as most people, a long journey. And I started off a long time ago being interested in space. And when I was a kid, that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an astronaut, everything space, everything technology. And, that was what I wanted to do. And
where did you grow up?
Well, it's kind of, I've been all over the place. Interestingly enough, there's a news story today that kind of goes along with where I started. Is I was born in England. I was born near London in a place called Upper Heyford. And I was my family was over there because of military. Yeah. And so I was a U.S. citizen, but I was born over there in a military hospital. And a couple of months after I was born, we came back to the United States on the SS United States. And what's interesting is right now, it is being towed out of the port of Philadelphia for the very last time. And it's headed down to just off the coast of Mobile, Alabama. It's going to become an artificial reef now. So I was watching that story and just thinking, wow, that's pretty cool. I came to the United States on the USS United States.
I watched it rust away in Philadelphia because you drive past it quite frequent. I drive past it quite frequently, and I see it rusting away there. And I just think about, what a splendid vessel it was and what a sad end, but it's going to be a reef. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's going on today. And it's just kind of interesting because I kind of got my start in the UK and on the USS United States. But we came back to the United States and we spent time in Tucson, Arizona, and then up at near Tuele, Utah, near Salt Lake City, kind of that area. And then I grew up over in Japan and Taiwan for several years, and then we came back.
Did you learn any of the languages?
At the time, I did. I knew both Japanese, and then we went to Taiwan, so I learned a little bit of Chinese. But I was at that age where I could pick it up quickly, but I could also forget it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there long enough for it to really stick, which is kind of sad. I would love to know both of those languages now, but.
So a classic military brat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you're growing up, you were fascinated by space.
Yeah.
So this was what era we talking about?
Well, this would have been mostly in the 70s, early 80s. And of course, at that time, the Apollo missions were ending. The last time we've been to the moon, which just seems to be credible to me, was back in December of 1972. And then after that, of course, we shifted over to the space shuttle era, and there was a lot of, development for that. That was obviously something I was interested in. When I was a kid, I was kind of like the ultimate geek. I got all these books that had all the tech manuals of the space shuttle, and I was learning a lot about that. And I thought that would be helpful at some day. Little did I know it actually helped me a lot with being a pilot because we do checklists and tech rotors and all that. But that, and I was really interested in space and astronomy and physics, and I did a lot of that growing up, especially in junior high and high school. Just being an astronaut was my goal, but I was really studying astrophysics, and that was really my direction of what I wanted to do. And along the way, I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of mentors, people that knew other people. And through that, one of my mentors was Frank Borman.
Wow.
And he kind of helped shape.
How did you meet Frank?
Well, I met him through somebody else who was General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. And he turned out to be, he was the son of Vandenberg, the second chief of staff of the Air Force. But he was like my neighbor, and I actually had helped clean his swimming pool and did work in his yard and that kind of thing. And
that was because you were in a military base, or?
Well, by that time, my family had been retired, and we eventually went back to Tucson, Arizona. And so I went through pretty much my last elementary school and then junior high and high school there in Tucson, Arizona. And with a lot of the different things that I was doing, I got a chance to meet he called him Sandy Vandenberg, and did a lot of work on his yard and all that. And then eventually through that, met other people. And so anyway, I got a chance to, kind of talk with Frank Borman, and he taught me a lot about what it would be to be an astronaut, what things that you would do, what you should apply for. And he also gave me, I still have it in my wallet, but he gave me a card. It was about persistence. And I don't think he made that saying, but it was something that he kept all his life. And he told me, if you learn this, this is going to get you through life. And it's basically, in a nutshell, is persistence is the most important thing in life. There's a lot of really talented people that really don't amount to much. There's a lot of wealthy people that don't really amount to much. There's a lot of people with great ideas, but they never follow through. But being persistent in what you want to do is the ultimate goal. And,
absolutely right. I can tell you, I'm in my late 70s. I can tell you it's absolutely true. Mm. I guess you can tell that for yourself now.
Well, that's, I mean, I'm talking about it now, but even when I was a teenager, that sort of struck a chord with me, and it's something that I've kind of kept with me all my life. And, persistence doesn't mean that you're dogmatically stuck on one particular path.
Right.
But it's following through, pushing forward, keep trying. This is one of the things I always say when people ask me about stuff is like, I try. And that doesn't mean I'm just doing something. It means I'm actually trying to do something and I'm putting effort into it. And, one of my professors at the academy talked about that too. He says, 90% of the people in the world don't really try. But if you try, you're going to all of a sudden get to the top of that group. And it's kind of along with that persistence as well. So,
isn't it an amazing balance between persisting and knowing when you're not going to make it?
Right.
There's kind of this terrible balance, and I call it a terrible balance because it's really quite frightening to think about it when you're really in that struggle, But anyway, yeah. So,
well, it's also, when you're in the middle of the battle, it's really hard to know. Are you pushing forward for something that is going to have value, and is it going to work out, or is it not? And I've seen that throughout my career, and it's difficult to keep that positivity while so many things are going on, and you're not sure what the outcome is going to be.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to be extraordinarily single-minded, but also have a sense of realism, a sense of grounding. Mm. But anyway, so there we are. You've met Frank Borman. Just incredible.
Yeah.
Is it because there were a lot of retirees, military retirees in that community?
Maybe. I just met a whole lot of people. I did a lot of stuff. I started a bike repair company when I was a kid, and obviously I was into model rocketry because that was something I was really interested in. I did restorations of vehicles, which is something that has sort of stayed with me most of my life too. So I met a lot of people doing that. Just all over the place. I was in a bunch of academic things where, like, for example, I was part of a Model United Nations, and that's something I learned a lot on that too. Most of it is how do you support something that either maybe you don't particularly like or you don't believe in, or understanding what other people are talking about and what their point of view is and where they're coming from, and kind of put it into context of why are they saying and why are they acting the way that they did. And, when I was in the Model United Nations, I actually represented China, and it was kind of interesting because, I had to kind of learn about their point of view and the way they approach things. And it was very not the way Americans approach things. So,
but also at a very interesting time in our relationship with China at that point, right?
Well, it was. At that time, China was not the big, financial economic country that we have now. Many years later, when I was flying, I got a chance to go to Beijing, and I spent a lot of time in that area. And even then, this was been in the late 90s, and even then, you saw thousands and thousands of bicycles and people with cardboard stacked up on it, just going in mayhem all over the streets. And a lot of the smog was there. This is way before the Olympics when they kind of cleaned that up. But I got a chance to be at Tiananmen Square, going out to the Great Wall, just touring around. So that was really cool. And especially for me to think back when I was a kid, I kind of represented them in the Model United Nations, which was kind of cool.
Very interesting. All right, so you're at school. You met Frank Borman. You're interested in rocketry. You're building model rockets, which, by the way, I was as a kid, only we didn't have kits in those days. We had to build them from scratch.
I built like multi-stage ones that were absolutely bizarre. Too much power.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting results that came out too. I inadvertently made a reentry one, which came back at me. But it was pretty neat.
Now, let me ask you, did you mix your own fuel?
I did not.
We did.
Technically, I didn't, but when I was in chemistry class, I learned a lot about how to do it. But I wasn't sure if I trusted myself making them or not.
We just made saltpeter and sugar in the absence of, the ability. Anyway, but it's a long story.
I was trying to make the chemical compounds that were used in the solid rocket boosters of the space shuttle. So that's why I decided I don't know if I trust myself with that.
No, that's really dangerous. So, okay. And then where did you go? I mean, you didn't become an astronaut clearly. But...
Right. Yeah, well, I did. I tried. I went pretty far along the process. But anyway, because of people like Sandy Vandenberg, Frank Borman, some of their advice, looking at the template of what, at that time, what was it that got people to be astronauts? And generally, many of them went to service academies. Almost all of them were pilots, test pilots. They all had engineering degrees, backgrounds like that, and a lot of other different criteria that if I were to follow that path, I would need to do. So I applied for the Air Force Academy, and I was accepted, and I went there, and I was in the class of 1988. So I know people are going to say, "Man, you're ancient," but that was a great opportunity for me to go there. And a funny thing is I told you I was really into astrophysics when I got applied and I got accepted to the academy. I was going to study astronautical engineering, and I thought it was the same thing, and it turns out it was very different, and I didn't realize that at the time. So I was a little bit bummed that I wasn't studying planets and that kind of stuff, but it was more orbits. But that helped really solidify my knowledge about orbital mechanics, rocketry, and much of what we are talking about today, and what we're seeing with what I call the second golden age of space, with the development of commercial, trying to go to the moon, trying to go to Mars, how all that works. And so that's kind of what I did there. I also, while I was there, I became a glider instructor pilot. I thought that would be a really
When did you get your pilot's license?
I guess technically was when I was about a sophomore at the Air Force Academy, because that's when I got my actual license to be an instructor pilot. I did fly before that a little bit, but it was hit or miss.
So my brothers and I, when we were growing up in South Africa, we got our pilot's licenses literally before we got our driver's licenses.
Oh, okay.
Because you could only get a driver's license at 18, but we could get a pilot's license, really, there's no age restriction. So we all, anyway,
Well, even when I was a kid, I flew in Cessnas.
You're right.
But I never actually got a license until I went to the academy.
Yeah. So you're sitting in the right seat, flying.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
And I enjoyed that a lot. And of course, becoming a glider instructor was really amazing to me, because you really have to learn about the craft of flying when you're in a glider, because you don't have a motor to make up for mistakes. You got to understand what the atmosphere is doing, what the winds are doing. Up at the Air Force Academy, we had the Rampart Range, which kind of ran perpendicular to the predominant winds. So we always got this wave effect coming over the academy, and on the top of the waves, you get something called lenticular clouds, and they make these lines of kind of lens clouds.
Right.
And then underneath that, you get rotor, and that's really dangerous. And the rotor portion of that tended to be right over the airfield at the Air Force Academy. So you really had to
fly under that, right?
Either under it or sometimes through it. You just really had to be careful, and you had to learn about things like microbursts. At one point, I was instructing somebody, and I remember this. We had the tow pilot and us, and of course, there's a tow line that connects the two planes. And as we took off, we got to just about 200 feet above the ground. And I remember that altitude particularly because we had a rule that if you had a problem and you had to release from the tow plane below 200 feet, you generally just tried to go straight and find something to land on. If you were above 200 feet and the conditions were right, you could come back and land. And so right at 200 feet, I just remember the tow plane disappeared. It just fell below my line of sight. And I had to release. And we were in like a microburst. And I remember feeling the straps of my harness digging into my shoulders because we were flying through that so much. But all of a sudden that went away and I had enough lift that I finished the 180 and I came back and landed. And back then we had things called like the safety pizza. So I got a pizza for that for safely landing the plane. But
that is a frightening moment. Wow.
It was interesting because, you learn a lot about yourself. What do you do in a split second? Do you make a decision to go straight? Do you not? And it's not like you have planned this out. You have to go with what is happening at that moment.
See, that's why I didn't continue flying. I was too much of a coward. I had some of these moments and it wasn't for me.
Well, for me, I loved it because I'm like, man, I actually can do this. I was able to figure out what was going on. I made a decision. And that's the thing about flying is it's very, I don't know. If you don't make a decision real quick, you're going to pay the price of it. So you have to make quick decisions based on what you have, and then you have to act on that and follow through. And I just loved it. You have to
trust your decision.
Yes.
That's what I couldn't do. I had to keep questioning. Also, I'm mechanically very challenged. My brothers are both great mechanics. I am mechanically, give me a book and I can teach from it. Give me a spanner, I'm only going to do damage.
Yeah, I'm the opposite of that. I'm very tactile with my hands. I like figuring out how things work. I take them apart, I put them together.
Right.
I've been that way all of my life. So anyway, flying, becoming an instructor. Eventually, later on, we did the T-41, which was the pre-screening for pilot training, and I enjoyed that. I learned a lot on that, especially with powered aircraft. The T-41 is like a Cessna, but with a big engine. It has 6-cylinder, 210 horsepower engine in it. So it meant that the performance was pretty good.
Is it high wing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just looks like a Cessna 172, but with a 6-cylinder, pretty powerful engine in it.
For most of my childhood, my father had a 172, and my brother owned a 172 in our early years here in the United States. Yeah. It's a great plane.
Yeah. So anyway, flying was a big deal at the academy. I graduated with an astronautical engineering degree. And I also got very fortunate. I was selected to go to Euranato Joint Jet Pilot Training, which is up at Shepherd Air Force Base. When you are graduating from the academy and you're going to pilot training, you had, at that time, we had a bunch of different choices. You had Luke, which is down at Arizona, which no longer exists anymore. Willie, which was in Williams Air Force Base, which was in Arizona. We had Laughlin, Reese, a bunch of other ones. But I got a chance to go to Euranato, which was great. It was kind of like the top tier one. So we got a chance to go fly with our NATO country members, both the students and the instructors. And we flew T-37s, T-38s, and we did a lot more low-level formation, four-ship, and we did a lot of that, much more than what you would see even at regular pilot training. So that was pretty cool. And, some great stories I had is I learned how to do instrument approaches really, really well because of a instructor pilot from Portugal. His name was Joaquim Barrego. And he was a really small guy, very great being instructor. And I was in a T-37, so you sit side by side, a tandem seating. And I was really struggling with instrument approaches. I tended to drop low below the glide path, and that's not something you want to do.
Yeah.
But I tended to do that all the time, and he was getting very frustrated with me, and he was able to reach over and he grabbed my oxygen mask or the hose. He squeezed it tight, and he goes, above glide path, above glide path or above MDA, you breathe. Below, no breathe. So it really helped me do that. And even throughout the rest of my flying career, every time I was doing instrument approaches, I kept remembering that. Above glide path, you breathe. Below, no breathe.
That's great.
But I had a good time with that, and ended up graduating from there, and then we had a very interesting time with our country at that time, and we were downsizing our military, the number of pilots. We actually had an overage of pilots at that time, so much so that they introduced something called a banking program. And what the idea was is that you had all these pilots that graduated, they had their wings, but we didn't have enough airframes for them. So we would bank them and have them do something else while we're waiting for things to change. We had cockpits or whatever. And that turned out to be both a positive and a negative for me and my goal to become an astronaut. It was a negative because it stopped my flying for a period of time, and it didn't allow me to develop on the normal rate that you would to go from co-pilot, aircraft commander, instructor pilot, evaluator pilot, and do that in a period of time where I would still be both young enough to apply and be competitive for an astronaut corps, and also have all the background and the experience that I wouldn't have had. And also it kind of helped or hurt with the progression in the military as well, because now you're not doing your primary mission.
Yes.
But on the flip side, it kind of helped me because I was fortunate enough to get selected for the Airforce Institute of Technology program, and they sent me to the Ohio State University, which is the best university in the Big Ten. I'm looking at Farzad off screen right now. But they sent me there as the civilian program, and I was able to get a double master's in aeronautical and astronautical engineering while I was there. And that helped with that part of the experience. So it was kind of a good news, bad news kind of story.
Yeah.
But the kind of funny thing about that, besides just being a couple of years at the Ohio State University getting the degree, was the first year or so, it was like, take your time. We don't need you back. We have too many pilots. Towards the middle part of the second year, they're like, when are you going to graduate? We need you back. It's like, wait a minute. A year ago, you said you didn't need me. Now you need me right away.
Welcome to the Air Force. Yeah, right.
So I wrapped up the degrees and graduated back in 1994, and immediately went back to flying. And I got a chance to go fly the T1A, which at that time was a newer trainer that they were just bringing online. Right. And I was able to finish up that requalification training, and then I went off to KC-135s. And
so what made the choice of KC-135? Was it a choice you could make, or was it? Well,
it was actually, I went to EuroNATO, and EuroNATO was almost always going to be fighters. And being a fighter pilot would have been a great thing to become a test pilot and move on with that path that I had talked with Frank Borman about. But because we were at the point in time where all of a sudden we had too many pilots and not enough airplanes, and we were introducing this bank program, we ended up being banked to other types of aircraft. And several of us, even though we graduated from EuroNATO, got banked into different kinds of planes. So I got banked into a KC-135. And, would it have been neat to do something else? Possibly, but it set forth a career path for me in the Air Force that led to quite a bit of things, including being able to be a commander at a couple different levels. So
let's profile this career in KC-135. So not everybody knows what a KC-135 is. So give us a little bit.
All right. Well, KC-135 is actually an older plane. The newest one was built before I was born. It was built back in 1964.
Wow.
And most of them were built in the late 50s and early 60s. And it was designed to primarily refuel the B-52 and provide that force projection capability for our bomber or our nuclear program. And as such, the KC-135s along with the B-52s tended to be on alert all the time, where you had the alert facilities, and you have if you remember videos of getting the klaxon going and all the people running out, getting into the planes and taking off, and we're going to go off and do our mission. That was predominantly what the KC-135 was for, and it has a boom on the back, which is kind of like a pipe. Think of like a gas pipe, that you would fill up your car, but on this long boom, and it has little winglets on it, and it's able to fly, and it inserts into the boom receptacle on your receiver aircraft, and then you're able to transfer fuel while you're flying. And that eventually branched out to fighters and others, and then we could also put something called a drogue, which looks like a big badminton, and you put it on the back of that the boom, and then you could have like Navy aircraft, which had a probe that stuck out, and it would go into that badminton, if you will, and then you could refuel. And so I got a chance to fly that and do a lot of refueling all over the world. In all kinds of different environments. I spent a lot of time with the Allied force over Kosovo. We did a lot of stuff in the Middle East, of course. And fortunately with me, I was able to do missions called capstones missions, which is missions where you take newly minted general officers and you take them to different parts of the world, and they can meet with their counterparts, and they establish those relationships. But me as the crew, we were able to go to all kinds of places. I landed a KC-135 in Moscow. We did it at Beijing as well. We spent a lot of time in the Eastern European areas. I went to Indonesia. I was at Tunisia as well, and got a chance to see quite a bit of the history that you might read about while in all these different locations. So it was really, a great opportunity for me.
So the KC-135s, when you joined the force, you were really refueling bombers, these long-distance bombers, but you said they soon started doing fighters and.
Yeah, a lot of that, transpired through the 60s, 70s, 80s. So even before me, if you remember like Vietnam, a lot of the missions involved KC-135s refueling the aircraft. And, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it is interesting when you think about what tanker aircraft have done for not only the United States military, but also the United States as well, is it was a critical capability that allowed us to be more than just a coastal defense kind of country. Right. Through refueling, we are now able to force project across the entire world. So, refueling cargo aircraft and allowing them to carry a lot of cargo and go long distances, to be able to react quickly in certain areas around the world, to be able to get forces there. All of it hinges on our refueling fleet, and KC-135s was kind of the backbone of that. We also, for a while, had KC-10s. Now we're trying to bring on the KC-46s. But even to this day, the 135 is kind of the backbone of our refueling.
How many are there of these KC-135?
Oh, there were hundreds and hundreds of them. I don't know what the numbers are now. There's many of them are over at basically Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. There's like the Boneyard that are there. So there's many of the ones that were probably the mid 50s up to the late 50s there. And then what we are flying now are the 60s. And they've been upgraded many, many times throughout its history. The biggest upgrades was probably the CFM56 engines, the big turbofan engines that they put on, which is what I pretty much flew. And also the avionics upgrades, going from what we call the steam jet, the steam dials and stuff, to the glass cockpit. Those are kind of the big changes for that. But
so what years were you flying these KC-135s?
From about 94, 95, all the way up to when I retired in 2013.
So you saw quite a few wars.
I was in a lot of places, many places that people have heard about, a lot of places people have not.
And supporting both the Army, the Air Force and the Navy?
Well, U.S. military, our NATO counterparts did a lot of refueling with our partners as well. Presidential support missions, capstones missions. I did a lot of special ops missions. which are kind of the black ops kind
Right.
of missions. Of course, the nuclear deterrence mission. Just pretty much, if there was a mission, we did it.
So presidential missions must have been particularly interesting, right?
Well, I don't think people realize that if the president goes somewhere, he doesn't just kind of get on a plane and go. There's this huge logistics trail that goes behind him. It's everything from taking his vehicles to his support staff to the pre-survey teams that go out before that. We also have assets all around the area that they're going, and then you have to support those assets. So this is huge trail that goes behind anytime the president moves anywhere. So, I don't know, people would be shocked, but it's like hundreds of aircraft at least are supporting each movement, especially if they're going to Europe or all these other places around the country. And so I'd be playing part of that. So we would ensure that whatever assets got where they're going, and then we would be at a location that we could be able to respond quickly if needed. So yeah.
So those trips that these presidents have taken to war zones, and there have been so many war zones in the last 20 years, that must have been particularly difficult given, that you're almost in enemy territory in terms of support and so on.
It can be. Things like OPSEC, Operations Security, is critical on those kinds of things. And, there's a variety of ways you can do it. One is just not get the information out there. Sometimes it could be diversionary things or just being in a position to act quickly before people can react to that. So, behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on than people, I think, realize.
Right. And so in those circumstances, were you briefed at the strategic level, or was it just your role, and what was the...
It really depended on what position I was in at the time. If you're talking about aircrew, it's pretty much kind of the tactical, maybe operational level.
Right.
You're going to go to this place to do this thing, and you're going to be there for about this amount of time. And then there's, of course, a command and control element to that, so that if you need to reach out for additional information or if they need to change the mission, that's all possible. But later on, if you're in higher levels, then you're talking more of the operational and strategic parts of that to include advanced teams and that kind of thing.
How is the command of these KC-135s? Was there a command structure, or was each aircraft separately?
You have something called the Tanker Airlift Control Center. It's over at Scott Air Force Base, and they control the entire global fleet of tankers and airlift, for example. There's other, similar ones for other aircraft, but that's the one I was predominantly working with. And so they will control the big picture. We need to get 3 tankers to this location to do this kind of thing, and we need, however many crews, and they manage things like locations, clearances, number of crew rests, that kind of stuff. And then the aircraft commander on each of the planes, what you have either mission commanders if there's multiple planes, and then you have aircraft commanders on each individual plane. You have your certain level of control over what's going on. So if, as an aircraft commander, you're responsible for the operation of the aircraft, and either just the aircraft or the mission commander of the aircraft that are under that group. And it could be everything from, I've got maintenance issues to I need more fuel, or I've got a crew issue, I've got a crew problem, or, those kinds of things. And then you work with the TACC to figure out how we're going to make this thing operate.
Right.
And I think the strength of the way we do things with our military is, we have centralized command, decentralized control. So we get guidance, but we also give a certain level of autonomy to our crews or our people. And that gives us a flexibility that I think is underappreciated. And you see that through other militaries around the country, around the world, that operate maybe, centralized control, centralized execution kind of thing.
Yeah, we see that particularly in this current war in Ukraine, how Russia has had to evolve from the centralized control and centralized command, and find ways to actually function better in the field.
Yeah, it's hard when you're brought up a certain way to change, especially when you're in the middle of something. And like we talked about before, is you never know, are these changes, are this direction that we're going to go? Is this going to be successful or not? And that's where in like the theories of war, the fog and friction of war comes in, right. is you have to react, you have to see what's going on at that time and make choices that may differ than what you've been trained. And that can be very, very difficult. And then beyond that, you're in a society where you're pretty much not given that autonomy. Right. And it's really hard to break through that.
It starts at the societal level. So I have to ask, were you ever in, supporting combat missions? When I've read about these KC-135s that have been flying over the combat areas to provide refueling for fighters, but you sounded like you were in the logistics.
Oh, no. Actually, in a lot of the times, it's actually funny. People think about things like tankers as being way away from the action. But in reality, we were like really, really close.
Yeah, you have to be the gas pump for the fighters to be able to stay in the action.
So what we want to do is we want to be able to allow the fighters, for example, to be able to have that on-site persistence as much as possible.
Yeah.
And if you're 1,000 miles away, then that kind of defeats that. So it's kind of interesting to see how close to the action we would be. And, we were called high-value assets. HAVA aircraft is what it was. And so we're protected, but we're also close. And you do that by a variety of different reasons or ways,
Yeah. A lot depends on the enemy's ability to bring you down, I guess.
Right. Well, the whole thing about air superiority is very important. And you were talking about Russia and Ukraine. That's something that neither side has actually had, and we're seeing the results of that. So as far as our military doctrine, especially in the Air Force, one of the things that we seek to do is to get air superiority. And that could be either temporal, meaning short periods of time, or it could be persistent, but we do try to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, the wars that we fought in recent years, we've always had air superiority. But, in the Russia-Ukraine war, the air is a much more dangerous place than, I guess, any place we fought in the past.
Well, there's a lot of things that are going on over there that are kind of interesting from either a military studying kind of point of view, or if you think about technology or so. Yeah. And one of the ones is kind of funny. I'm wearing my drone hat. I'm known for flying drones, but it is amazing to see how much drones are affecting the tactics, the operational strategic roles.
Changing the world. It's changing the world.
Yeah, and in ways that we don't really, I don't think we fully understand quite yet.
Right.
But, I remember back in the 90s, General Jumper was talking about putting missiles on our unmanned aircraft at that time, and people thought he was crazy. It's like, that'll never work, whatever. And then we started talking about using UAVs and what do we do with crews? And the crews are, they're 10,000 miles away and they're not really part of the war. Are they really war fighters? Are they not? How are we going to make this work? And flash forward to now, and we're finding out that little drones that I fly myself, which back in the 90s would have been multi-million-dollar, super top secret equipment, are being used in all kinds of ways to shape warfare. And not only that, but we're kind of making tanks obsolete by using little drones that have, little some type of munition on it that you're able to fly around, find out its weakness, and come in. It's just amazing to me.
It's really moved the needle so dramatically in terms of, it's changed the strategic balance on the battlefield, but now it's all about who can manufacture sufficient number of, electronically intelligent drones, to win the battlefield. And that's an area where I'm not sure our engineering infrastructure is yet ready to tackle in terms of the challenges that we have.
Well, at least we are able to observe this, and we're seeing it live real time, and we're seeing what works, what doesn't. We also see what the countermeasures are, at least as it's being applied right now. But I think that this level of change of how we approach war is going to continue to evolve, and it's only going to get more and more important, especially when we start thinking about things like AI or whatever. We bring that into the mix,
Right.
where we don't need to have, for every drone, we have one pilot. Now we have maybe one pilot for 1,000 drones, or no pilot for 10,000 drones. And in that scenario, how do you articulate what your goals are for this AI-driven swarm of drones? And when does it know enough is enough? When does it, it's going too far? Is it not going too far? I mean, do you just set it and go, and then it just keeps working even if you've changed your mind? I mean, I think these kinds of things we're going to have to think about and develop as we see just how shockingly fast that we're with this AI development that's coming around. And we talk about Grok, we talk about OpenAI, we talk about ChatGPT and all that. But this is just barely scratching the surface. And, with any capability, people are going to figure out different ways of using it. And then that goes down to that loop of, we use it for this, somebody else comes up with a countermeasure, and then you have another countermeasure for that countermeasure, and it's just going to grow, tremendously.
My fear is, and I'd be really interested in your observation on this, my fear is that our industrial development, the state of our industrial development is not at a point that we can build into the loop the actual engineering and production capacity that we need to fulfill any plan or any evolution of this set of opportunities or this set of dangers.
That's very possible, but I like to be a little bit more positive thinking into the future. And that, what I mean by that is, whenever opportunity comes up, we've always risen to that challenge. It may not have been apparent right away, but we've figured out some way of using that to our advantage. And I think that, despite challenges that we may have right now, or what we perceive them to be, I think we'll still rise up to that challenge. It's been our history, and I don't see why that would change. At least I'm hopeful that it won't change. One thing about drones that I think is interesting is it's not necessarily the technology of how to build drones and use them that's our issue. Our issue has been some of the guidance or the policies that affect the use of drones. And as an example is, I fly a DJI drone. I know there's a lot of stuff in the news about DJI. Should we use them? Right. The bottom line is that I use them because they are by far the best. They have the capabilities, the technology. They just freaking work. They're reliable. It's amazing. But why don't we have competitive drone manufacturers in the United States? And a lot of it has to do with the policies that we've come out with that have dissuaded it, whether it's too much risk, or we just want to make sure that you can't do certain things, or we want to restrict how they're used. And it's basically destroyed, or at least greatly suppressed, the domestic drone manufacturing capability. And because of that, companies like DJI particularly have cornered the market because they've brought this technology in.
But I think you're saying exactly where I was going. And so for me, the issue is we've stopped manufacturing in this country to a large degree, and we've surrendered the manufacturing, the base manufacturing to, for example, China, and they've capitalized on that enormously, such as the case with DJI. So the generalized case of the specific problem that you cite is the drone manufacturing, but there's a whole lot of other supporting elements to that in terms of manufacture. So that was my biggest worry, which brings me to the question of Elon Musk and what he's been able to do in terms of turning around our manufacturing process. And I'm seeing, and we're sitting in Capital Factory, in the studios of Capital Factory, where there's such a lot of startup energy, and so much of that energy now is being directed into physical manufacturing of things whereas it was unthought of, 5 years, 10 years ago. And a lot of that is because of the change. And that brings me to the work you're doing now. So you graduated from flying these gigantic refueling monsters to a drone. And what was that transition? How did we get there?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. There's a variety of different reasons, but I retired in 2013. I immediately started working over at USAA at the headquarters down in San Antonio, and I was helping them with not only change management, but also sort of strategic planning for where the company was going to go, products and all
been
that
to
kind of
their
stuff.
headquarters is a magnificent place.
Yeah, they call it like the Pentagon of the Texas. Or whatever.
Right.
But it's an amazing facility, amazing people. USAA has had a pretty interesting history.
Amazing company.
And so I got a chance to do that for a while. And then my mom kind of got sick, so I decided to leave that to go take care of her. And she is actually one of the reasons why I got interested in some of Tesla and why I'm doing what the factory is now, and also my background in space. So all of that, what happened is, for example, my mom was always worried that since she lost her driver's license, she lost her independence, and she wishes she had a car that could drive her around.
Wow.
And at that time, really, that didn't exist. And I realized that there's two big issues with my mom, and I think representative of a lot of people. One is the technology really wasn't there yet, so she wasn't able to use that. And the second thing is technology itself was kind of alien to her, and being able to understand how is the car driving?
Yeah.
How do you tell it where you're going to go? How do you interact with it? What if it doesn't do what you want? So those kinds of things, I think, were kind of barriers to her. So I started wanting to learn a little bit more about the technology and where we were with something like that. And of course, I started finding a little bit more about Tesla on that.
What year were we in now?
Well, this would have been probably around from 2017 through 2019 kind of time. So my mom passed away in 2017, but I really thought, from her experience, that would be really something cool to know about. And I was thinking at some point in the future, I would probably be needing that technology and that capability. And I was thinking back to flying too, is a lot of things that you do in flying is muscle memory. So you do it over and over, and then you just second nature. And there was early on a study that had to do with G loss of consciousness in F-16s. And when some pilots would have that, when they would come to, they would grab for the stick kind of between their knees where we were trained with the T-37, T-38, all the various trainers. So that muscle memory was there, but on a F-16, it's off to the side.
Yeah.
So there was a moment of time where their muscle memory and just coming to kind of defeated what they wanted to do, and they had to realize that. And so the idea of muscle memory is what I've been thinking about with self-driving and understand the technology is, if I learned it now when I was young enough and I didn't need it, later on, it would be muscle memory, and I would understand how to use that and kind of address the knowledge of technology as well. So those were kind of my things that I was really looking into for that. And of course, I started seeing when Giga Berlin was announced. Before that, Shanghai had been around from like 2018, 2019, that time frame. And then, of course, Giga Berlin was announced. And there was people like Jason Wang and Tobias Lind and the Wolfpack brothers that were flying their drones over the factories. And Wuwa, of course, from Shanghai. I thought, I think I could probably do that. And of course, when they announced Giga Texas, I thought, well, I'm going to go up there and see where it is. And I drove up there. I had no idea where it was. I finally found it. I stopped at the side of the road. I did a video with my phone, and I put it out there. And I just said, hey, what do you guys think? Anybody interested in this? And one of the funny things is learning about YouTube and making videos is I got a lot of bad comments about, what are you using a phone for? And why are you doing it in portrait mode? And I'm like, I didn't even know where the place was. Give me a break, But it became pretty obvious that I needed a drone to be able to show it. Right. And like I said, I thought from what the other guys were doing at Shanghai and Berlin that I could do that too. But I wanted to add something more, and that was trying to figure out what was going on and not just showing, hey, there's some dirt moving or they're putting up a wall or whatever.
Yeah, that's the great thing about your videos. I mean, it's like being taught all about the engineering, the construction, and so on. We learn an enormous amount from what you do. So you've definitely achieved that goal.
Well, I always want to, you asked me about, making things, and I'm always wanting to be able to take things apart and figure out how they work. And so I'm always that way anyway. And, I figured, I think I could probably start adding this in. And I first started with like text type stuff, putting a little, and that turned out, I did that for a while, mostly because I didn't know if anybody really wanted to hear from me or if it would be useful. But it turned out that took a lot more effort building into each video that I started just talking, and it saved me a lot of time. So that's why I really did
and
that.
And also is a lot more interesting, and you really make it very accessible the way you discuss it. For me anyway, and I'm not an engineer, but have built a lot of software and built a lot of companies, and so it's very accessible.
Well, thank you. That's something I think I kind of learned in the military is, we have a lot of jargon, we have a lot of acronyms and acronyms for acronyms and all kinds of stuff. And I found that a lot of time people were using the jargon or the acronyms and they didn't really know what they were talking about. Right. They just sort of said, oh, we have a HAVA over here. We're going to, and I'm like, all right. So I consciously started just saying what it was and not using the acronyms as much as I possibly could, because I found that helped me understand more about what was going on and make sure that I knew what I was talking about. And it just helped everybody else too, because, when you're using the jargon and the acronyms in a group, people are all kind of going, yeah, and they really don't know what you're talking about.
and, you should know that Elon famously is, banned acronyms in Tesla and all his companies. And, he gets pretty hot under the collar when people start using acronyms. Yeah,
well, I agree in that case. That's something, like I said, back in the military, I consciously stopped doing just because it turned out to be more of a barrier than a help.
Right, right.
It makes you sound like you're important or you're knowledgeable, but you're really not.
So where are we going with where we are now, with the drone flying, and what's the plan? Or is there a plan? Yeah.
Well, this has been an interesting journey. When I started, I wasn't sure if people would be interested in it, and it looked like it was interested enough. And my original goal, kind of naively, was I thought, well, they're just starting the factory now. They say they're going to have the Cybertruck in about a year and a half. I think I'll just go through until the Cybertruck is done.
Yeah. Right.
And so I'm like 4 years later, then the Cybertruck came out. But I don't know. There's a couple of things, when later in my military career, especially when I was over in Iraq, I was part of the reconstruction, or at least the planning for what was going on with Iraq. And I got a chance to work at pretty high levels with the Department of Defense, Department of State, and some of the Iraqi government, and figure out how you build stuff and how do you make things happen. And that eventually became just sort of knowledge about some construction, but also things like agile program management and those kinds of things. And just how do you, in a government organization, how do you get things done? And being able to watch something like the factory has been really interesting to me because, if you're just managing a large construction project, that's a big job. And there's so much that goes into building a factory or anything. If you're managing production of products, that's a big job because there's a lot that goes into that. Everything from design, development, setting up production lines, getting the infrastructure, the supplies to make these products. But what you see at Giga Texas, and you also see that down at Starbase and a lot of other places, is they're doing both at the exact same time. And that is like on another couple of levels above just managing one or the other. Right. And I think that is something people just do not, if you've never been in anything like that at all, you have no concept of how difficult that is. And, they have to make billions of decisions every day about all kinds of stuff, some of which are opposite of what you need for one of the others. Like, for example, early on with Giga Texas, I talked to some of the contractors and they were getting frustrated because Tesla would say, we need to put a wall over here. And the contractors are like, but eventually that's going to be plumbing's going to go through there or whatever. And Tesla's like, no, we need a wall right there right now. And the contractors are like, but this is dumb. But Tesla's like, no, we need it. Well, they needed it because at that point in time, they were going to do something that they needed to get done. And then they knew later on that they would then get rid of that wall. And it was just watching and hearing the conflict between the two of, we got to build this thing, but no, we got to make this thing, and another thing that they did early on that I thought was pretty cool, and they continue to do it now, and you also see that Starbase and a lot of the other facilities is in the military, we called things like minimum essential capabilities. So as you're doing something, you get the minimum that you need to be able to do the mission at that time, not all of it.
Right.
And at Giga Texas, they did that exact thing. They set up the stamping structure, the body in white, some of the casting, the paint, and a small part of the general assembly so they could start building the Model Ys. And I had so many people asking, well, they can't build them. The factory's not done. And I'm like, well, they are. And the way they're doing it is that they built the minimum essential parts that they needed to start putting the cars out while they're still painting and building.
I remember the Giga Rodeo, what was it called? The
Cyber Rodeo?
Cyber Rodeo. I remember touring the factory in the Cyber Rodeo, and the building was still going on, and it was like being in a half-built. I mean, it was a half-built.
It was like an 80% not built building.
That's right.
It was so empty.
That's right. It was amazing, and a lot of people commented on it, but I just thought, my God, the opportunities here, in terms of what could still be done.
Well, it's not just the floor space that you see, it's the vertical as well. And that's something I've tried to at least help people understand is that Giga Texas is anywhere, depending on which part of the building you're looking at, 1 to 4 floors with mezzanines and all that. And they're using all of that vertical and the horizontal. Yeah. And in some cases, they're blowing out walls and adding on so that they can keep putting more and more stuff in there.
I remember having this debate with Troy Tesla, where he did a calculation of the size of the area of Giga Texas and calculated the productive capacity of Giga Texas based upon the area of, I think it was Shanghai or something. And I said to him, Troy, it was of Fremont. I said, Troy, it's not like they've got multiple levels. Yeah, but you can't really use a mezzanine. Yeah, you can't really use the thing. Oh, was he wrong? I mean, can they use those?
Yeah, we're not talking mezzanines like little tiny things. We're talking very substantial, huge. Massive. I mean, steel beams that are just gigantic, that they're putting into this stuff. But they're using, they are eventually going to use every square inch of that space, but they still haven't finished it. I mean, they've been building so much. They've been adding so much. You can see on the west side of General Assembly near where the entrance is, because they thankfully put gigantic windows there. Yeah. And, some people go, well, why are you walking or looking through the windows? That's bad. And I'm like, well, you can just stand on the highway and see all this stuff too. Yeah, so it's not like I'm showing you anything you can't see.
Yeah, you sure can.
But you can just see how much stuff that they're building. And they've been doing this for, in July, it'll be 5 years. And there's still space in that factory to add stuff.
I'm very excited to see what comes of, this year. This year is going to be incredibly exciting. So we're going to see more drone flights. I'm very excited to see the lithium plant because we've watched that grow up. I pass it every time I go to Boca Chica, and I do that, almost every flight, every launch. We see each other at the launches. And so what's the future for this podcast? I mean, you've talked about, watching the rest of it build out. And then,
Well, they haven't finished. In fact, they're just starting some major new projects up there. So there's still a lot of interest to me because I want to find out what they're doing. I think it's cool. The relationship that they've given me has just been amazing. That they let me do this. But as far as what I want to do is, I think, I'll keep doing this. Right now, I do it 3 times a week. Maybe at some point, I'll drop that down a little. But I'm also interested in space, and that is my actual background.
Right.
And so covering what's going on down at Starbase is very interesting to me.
They don't allow drone flights.
They
only,
don't.
So.
The only people that can fly drones down there are pretty much SpaceX, the drone team, or
Right.
anybody that's working directly for SpaceX. And that's actually very important, not only just to make sure that they don't have any problems with any of the active work that's going
Right.
on, but,
Some of the stuff is not for public.
yeah, well, there's that, and it's just safety, and just ultimately, I was talking about tankers being critical for the United States to be able to force protect and become more than just a coastal defense kind of country. If SpaceX is successful, and it's not just SpaceX, if you look at Blue Origin, you look
Right.
at a lot of the other companies that are up and coming through this commercial space, the plans that they have, the goals that they have, the capabilities that they want to have, eventually is all going to require on-orbit refilling.
Right.
And that's going to be a system of depots and also basically tankers to refill them and to keep them able to, give that fuel, the oxidizer and the whatever they're going to use for the fuel, so that we can go off and do all of our lunar, Mars, solar system, whatever.
Yeah.
And speaking in military terms, the center of gravity of our space plans is on-orbit refilling. And the center of gravity of on-orbit refilling is the launch systems to be able to get the rockets, the tankers up into orbit. And things like Starbase, probably what we see at Cape Canaveral or Kennedy Space Center, maybe Vandenberg, obviously, but other places maybe, those are going to be like the critical infrastructure that needs to be protected. And I think that Starbase is going to be designated that sooner than later.
Yes.
So things like, drones or people walking up and seeing stuff, which the fact that you can walk up and see so much stuff
It is the
amazing.
most extraordinary thing in the world. I mean, we went there, my wife and I went there, I think our first visit was like 4 years ago. And there was almost nothing.
Right.
I mean, you could walk right up to the launch pad itself.
Exactly.
I mean, it was incredible. It's become less and less, but it's still the most extraordinary thing that you could walk up to this incredible launch. I mean, there's no way you can do that at Kennedy Space Center or anywhere in Cape Canaveral. I don't think anywhere in the world.
No, I think it's unique in the world.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you're thinking about going, go now. Because every time that they build a new building, every time that they put a new fence up, every time that they do other infrastructure development there, they're all becoming walls. They're cutting off access.
Yeah.
And, right now they're in the process of trying to incorporate Starbase as a city in Texas. I think early May is when there's going to be a vote on that. Assuming that passes, it will be a new city. There's some recent new kind of architectural and site planning documents that are coming out showing what they want to do.
Right.
But I think that what that's saying is that they're going to start fencing off or moving people farther and farther back. And then later meaning what? Later this year, next year, whatever, going back to that in-orbit refueling and the launch systems being kind of that center of gravity, being a national infrastructure, critical infrastructure, it would not surprise me if they come up and maybe federally they say, we're going to take over this land and then we're not going to allow people to get there.
Close the beach.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable. It's just the question of is when.
So that's the bad news. The good news is they are building some development where you'll be able to watch the launches from the side of the river, a little bit further away, but from Starbase. So it's not the end of the world.
No, it's not. It's just, we're moving from the wild, wild west to a more mature system.
But we've enjoyed. I mean, it's been such a joy to be there, and the community that is there when you go and visit, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I want to, going back to what I'm going to do is I would like to continue to do more coverage of that and try to get that story out to people, let them understand what is going on, why they should be excited about that.
Right.
A lot of what SpaceX and, Rocket Lab, Blue Origin, many of the other countries coming in are doing things that when I was a kid, I was hoping that we would see.
Yeah, we dreamed about it as kids. But I will say this, only SpaceX is thinking about the orbital refueling. Only SpaceX have the hardware in development that will do orbital refueling. The others are everybody's been way behind SpaceX for all this time. So it just, it falls to SpaceX to continue that leadership.
Yeah, I think there's a strength and a weakness to that. I really am happy that some company like SpaceX and somebody like an Elon Musk is pushing so hard to make this happen. It's disappointing that even with somebody doing that a lot of other people haven't followed along or realized this is the direction that we're going. It is happening. I think it's going to be fits and starts, and it's going to, like on our national space program, like a lot of things with our national programs right now, we're going to be in a period of a extreme change and turmoil.
Yes.
But a lot of that's being driven by this vision of we got to make this happen. We got to, put all this infrastructure. We got to build it and we got to go. But on the flip side of that is we can't just rely on one. So I'm hoping that this is, I call it the second golden age of space. And what I mean by that is that all these other organizations are going to now be empowered. They're going to realize that there is a path that we can follow this path. The old ways are not the right ways.
Exactly.
And I'm hoping that we see more of that.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really pleased we were able to sit down and get you, when you're not flying, come and sit down and talk to us.
Well, I appreciate that.
And, you certainly have proved to be a maverick in terms of, from a KC-135 pilot to probably our most important window on what's happening at Tesla, at the Giga factory, and of course what's happening at SpaceX. So thanks for coming in.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks for having me. And it's just been an interesting journey, and I think just continuing to learn and try new things is the best thing you can do for life, and that's what I'm going to try to do.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Appreciate it.